Hello, everyone. My name is Martha Ellis. I'm the Executive Director for the Public Safety Broadband Technology Association. Once a week, we like to get together with some guest speakers and talk a little bit about what we got done this week. And the PSBTA had a very busy week. We had 3 separate webinars covering various topics. And today we've got retired Fire Chief Al Gillespie with us. And then we also have Red Grasso, who is the Program Director for the North Carolina First Responders Emerging Technologies Program. How'd I do, Red?
You did great.
Okay, awesome. And we're just really happy to have you guys here today. They were in attendance to some of the webinars, but the topics, of course, are quite salient to anybody who's interested in, one, making sure that first responders have a very reliable broadband network, and two, looking at how the technologies are evolving within that ecosystem to continually provide first responders the ability to do their jobs in a very efficient and life-saving way. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and start with our first webinar that we had on August 26th. And the premise of that particular webinar was talking about the capabilities of the First Responders Network Authority, which of course is the governing body, the .gov side of the house, if you will, that oversees everything that goes on with FirstNet, which is the nation's only public safety broadband network that's specifically designated for first responders. So Al, I'm going to start with you today, talking a little bit about some of the efforts that's going on with the PSSA, which is the Public Safety Spectrum Alliance, what you're doing, why it's important, and why the 3 principles that are defined in their mission are so important.
Okay, well, thanks. Well, to start with, it's kind of a long story because there was a PSA before, the Public Safety Alliance. And that was the original driving force that came together of all of the associations and agencies for public safety when we were looking at trying to get what became the D block in those days, and now is what we all know as FirstNet. So that effort through the Public Safety Alliance, the PSA, drove the legislation that was passed in 2012 and stood up as part of the legislation what is the public safety, or excuse me, the authority, the FirstNet authority in the Department of Commerce as a separate entity. And that governing body then put together the information that became an RFP for any company that was interested in bidding to build our network, public safety's network. In addition to that, they stood up an advisory board. Now, on the authority board itself, public safety is well represented. We have different aspects of public safety, EMS, fire, and law enforcement on the board. And in fact, have been one of the sheriffs was actually one of the chairs of the board. So we have that representation on the board all the time, that mandated by law. But they also stood up the advisory board for that, which is all public safety, basically. I mean, there's a few folks that aren't, but to make sure that, one, the authority is doing the right thing, two, that the company that has got the bid is doing the right thing, and to help steer the direction of where the monies that are coming in from FirstNet are being spent back into the program to make sure that we're getting as public safety what we need and what we want from the program. So back in 2002, when all of this kind of bubbled up post 9/11, the 4.9 gigahertz network was given to public safety in those days. There's 50 megahertz of spectrum in the 4.9 range that was given to public safety to use. And we've had that since then. Just recently, the FCC has talked about trying to get it back and auction it off for other people to use. And we think that's a poor use of it. They think that based on the licensure, that there was some underuse of that, but it's kind of a misnomer because the licensures were given out in geographic areas. It doesn't talk about all of the people that are using it in those geographic areas. And in fact, because the rules weren't established very well, a lot of folks came on without checking the box. They didn't understand how that would affect us. So when we heard that the FCC was starting to make noise about this, we got the band back together. And the band in those days, some of the people that are in the Public Safety Spectrum Alliance now, the PSSA, are the original players. Chuck is one of the original members. Jeff Johnson is, and Sue was the original board member, original chair of the board when we actually started making progress. I guess that would be my point on her starting on this. So we saw the need, we stood it back up for that reason, and we've been reaching out to the associations, and to my knowledge, I think all of the associations that we've approached have agreed that we want to keep this for public safety. Now, why are we pushing to have the authority take controlling interest of this spectrum for us? It's an already established entity. We know that they can do what they're doing. We just talked about public safety being represented in it. They're not beholden to any particular company, so they can make a choice based on what's good for public safety. And we don't have to create something that is brand new. Now, maybe there's some other model out there that we're not familiar with, and we're okay with looking at other options, but this seems like the very best option for us. It can happen quickly. It could happen with a wave of a wand, basically. Yeah. We don't have to go through the legislative process to make this happen. Again, we can just make it happen. They can make it happen. We can't. So we're giving them advice to do the right thing here by public safety.
Yeah, and I heard, of course, a lot of things that you talked about in there, and I think one of the key things that's really important for people to realize, not only is this very robust oversight framework in place that is got a very heavy public safety representation, but all of this is statutorily driven. I mean, this came out of a very robust effort to create language that would be put into a bill that would be actually voted on, right, and signed. It is a statutory directive at this point. So, and it's very well laid out. And it's funny because during the webinar, I actually pointed out that we as public servants see it as being very well laid out because we were so engaged in the process. I mean, clearly you and all of the leadership across the board that were involved in that had a vision, and the public safety voice was heard, and you framed it so it would continue to be heard, so that we wouldn't have anybody trying to make a lot of money off of the first responders, et cetera, et cetera. And that another important part is because of that statutory language, you've got this sustainability, this reliable thing that is going to be there in perpetuity, really, to manage this. So it's not something that's willy-nilly. It's not something that people are like, well, I don't know if I want to invest in that or have faith in that. So I think what you guys did was really it was really unprecedented. And again, I'm just going to give you kudos for all the work that you and that team did. So
and look at the success they've already had with FirstNet. I mean, they're way ahead of schedule with the company making sure this happens. We had a 25-year. They have a 25-year contract. The first 5 years of that were very strict on the accomplishments they need to happen, and we're 3.5 years into this, and they're 85% completed with what was required in that first 5 years already. So the company's doing good that's doing it for us, but they're doing good because they have somebody on the backside monitoring that constantly.
Well, and truth be known, Al, and I think you know this better than anybody, I think, and I'll go ahead and say FirstNet, AT&T, I think AT&T was one of the only large companies, I know that we're the only large telecommunications company that actually bid it. And most of the reason I believe most people didn't bid it is because they knew the oversight was going to be so rigorous. So, AT&T was the only one willing to jump into the ring in that context, speaking specifically to FirstNet, not about 4.9, but
right.
Getting this in place. They were the only ones that were willing to say, yeah, we can do that. We're willing to work with the federal government and work within these constraints. So that's a big deal. I think that was a big commitment on the part of AT&T to support public safety, being willing to really step outside of a typical corporate model and engage with the federal government at this level. It's one of the largest private public partnerships.
And I want to make sure that we don't cross streams on this, because AT&T is building the FirstNet network for us.
Correct.
They are not the authority. or is the
Right.
authority bound to them on any other issue like 4.9?
Chief, can I
Exactly.
just say
Go ahead.
I love the Ghostbusters reference. Thanks for that. That's excellent.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, and to that point too, Al, it's also important that people realize that AT&T does not own this spectrum. There was no land grab here. This spectrum is in the stewardship of the authority on our behalf. So that's
Right.
a really important distinction to make as well. So Red, I want to talk a little bit. The chief was talking about the current licensure for 4.9 and how it might be a little bit deceiving as far as the current use. I want to talk about the future because it sounds like just the very name of the organization that you're working for is all about the future and looking for these emerging technologies that are going to continue to help first responders. So when we look at the 4.9 spectrum sitting there, and let's just presume that it's not being used at the highest level it could be used. I think it's being used more than what is reflected in the current licensure. But let's look at how it could be used in the future. When you look at where the technology is moving right now for first responders, and this is going to be a softball question: is the need for spectrum increasing or decreasing?
Definitely increasing. Yeah, and I mean, I think, part of what I look at, and again, my hat's off to all the predecessors, such as Chief and Jeff Johnson and everybody that really made all this happen. I mean, I was a line firefighter in 2002, 2003, and following what was going on in 2010 with the auction and the D block and stuff like that. And I am really thankful for all of their efforts to bring us where we are today. In terms of the future, I mean, I think that, one of the appealing things for any of the companies that bid on FirstNet was a 10 by 10, to look at that and be licensed to use that spectrum. As you said, that, it's not a land grab, it's not their spectrum, but they're able to use that. And I think, over the course of 25 years, as 5G is already on us, and who knows what 25 years from now, depending on how fast our Gs move, what generation we're going to be at. But, I mean, I think one of the exciting things a little bit about 5G is the ability to do the non-standalone, where you're able to use 5G radios attached to a 4G core. That's going to make transition a lot easier. And obviously from a technical standpoint, then you're able to take band 14, you're able to migrate it fairly seamlessly on behalf of the responders to kind of serve. But band 14 is only a 10 by 10, it's only 20 megahertz. And so part of the promises of 5G, especially fully developed standalone 5G with a 5G core, is higher throughput, somewhat because at higher spectrum, at higher frequencies, you're getting larger chunks of spectrum. So 50 megahertz in 4.9 that could potentially be utilized for 5G technology is going to keep public safety relevant, and it's going to keep the appeal of a 25-year contract where public safety owns the spectrum and a public-private partnership is delivering the technology.
And let me just be clear. I want to make a super clear distinction for any listeners. We are not, and just to be clear, we're not proposing that this automatically goes into that cache of spectrum that's already contracted with FirstNet. Our proposal is to make sure that it goes to the authority, who we have a great deal of trust in because of the way that it's framed and the oversight and the engagement with public safety. The idea is that it goes there so that they can make the best decision on how to amplify and optimize the use by first responders. So I know sometimes it's really kind of a hard distinction to make between FirstNet built with AT&T and the authority, but the authority, they are the governing body, and the idea is that it goes to them so that all of the public safety influence can be engaged to further decide where that goes and how it's best leveraged. So
Right. It's a great point, Martha. Just quickly, Red really touched on an important part of the future with the 5G and beyond.
yeah.
As we go to this, when we got what is FirstNet now as our standalone core network, we we knew that we would use this thing quickly, and there's still plenty of it there. Don't get me wrong, but you have to look at the future on without it. How are you going to be able to do the things that are the future projections that Red just talked about? And that question actually came up early on because we had that spectrum. When the authority was stood up, one of the questions that was asked them was, what about the 4.9? But they were such a new organization at that point that they didn't even have any employees. They had a board, but there were
Yeah.
no employees within it at that point. So it kind of got pushed to the side at that point, and it wasn't as important as it is today, particularly when somebody's trying to grab it and take it away from us.
Exactly. And such a great point. There was so much work that needed to be done, not even just standing up the authority, but going through that RFP process and the subsequent judicial challenge. Clearly there was plenty to do for those folks. And so kind of funny that they're like, well, why didn't you say anything about this? But it's all good. We had big priorities back then. So,
Yes.
all right. So I want to go into the ecosystem a little bit, and then we'll move into hardware, because that's kind of the way that our webinars went this week. So the webinar that we did yesterday morning, which was the 27th, was a webinar that we do in partnership with FirstNet, built with AT&T, and it was the apps that can save first responder lives. And again, this really speaks to how the innovation is being allowed to really run now, because the innovation could do what it could do, but until you had the linchpin in place, which of course is that robust network with priority and preemption, along with all of the other components of what FirstNet brings to the table, I loved seeing where these things were going. So, Red, I'm going to talk to you a little bit. I know you were a first responder, so I want you to think back to your jurisdiction and maybe what it would have been like. I don't know if you have rail lines going through or if you're mutual or automatic gates. Okay, so you roll up and you've got 3 cars on their side, and they're placarded, and you're not 100% sure what's in there. Back in the old days, do you remember what we used to have to do?
Well, we had the emergency response guide as sort of a general evacuate everybody for 5 miles or whatever it recommendation was broadly. And then the other training that we sort of had was find the engineer and see if you can get the bill of lading. That
That's
was
exactly.
see if you
That's
can find them.
exactly.
See,
That's exactly where I was headed. Now, where do you think that engineer and that conductor was when their train was sideways off the rail?
yeah.
Good
Well,
luck.
and they're a mile away because that's how long
Right.
it took for the train to stop. So yeah.
Exactly.
If they survive.
Exactly. Yeah, if they survived. Yeah. So let's talk about Ask Rail, because I thought that was a fascinating application, and I'm just going to give a super high level synopsis of what this application does. You are actually able to go in and identify all of those rail cars have identification numbers on them, and you can actually enter that identification number, and you will get a very robust list, not only of what's in that car, but what is in every car on that train. And then it's connected right to the emergency response guide. So talk about how that would really have facilitated one of those hair-raising catastrophic moments when you've got a potential multiple hazardous materials releases going on in your jurisdiction.
Well, I tell you, one of the things that really excites me about Ask Rail and some of the other apps that are really coming in, and I love your title of, apps that save lives. I think one of the challenges I always found in being a firefighter was sort of a jack of all trades, and I don't want to say a master of none. I mean, obviously, I kind of honed in on communications and kind of made that my thing. But we had so much Con Ed, we had so many different things that we had to pay attention to between medical, between hazmat, and yet the reality of how many calls we might run involving those kind of specialties was actually quite low. And thinking back, although my memory is not as good as it used to be, I want to say in 10 years, I have about 3 times I remember responding to rail incidents. That's not a lot. And so
Mhm.
even if, through hazardous material Con Ed and thinking about rail response, it's going to be so far and few between that an application like Ask Rail really brings the knowledge that you might need for that, once in a 10-year, once in a lifetime kind of call. And I think that most first responders don't take that for granted. That the public might kind of say, "Oh, well, you guys do trench rescue. That's great." Well, in 10 years, we never did trench rescue except for once a year during Con Ed. So,
Yeah.
you know, when you're responding to things like a train emergency, there's a lot of different things that go through your head, and sometimes, you know, thinking back to that Con Ed may not be there. So, being able to have Ask Rail as kind of a partner in your response, that you're able to just reference it and get the information you need, I think is really both a benefit to the responders and then therefore a benefit to the citizens.
Yeah, getting it and also being able to share it, right, with all the incoming units and your partners are going to also be helping to evacuate neighborhoods and those sorts of things. So, Al, let's talk about the Vegas area for a minute. Any potential there for rail incidents?
Well, yeah, but let me readdress that, because I'm an old hazmat guy and a
Mhm.
instructor in the college level with hazardous and flammable, explosive, and toxic materials. But before I was a fire chief in North Las Vegas, I was a fire chief in Augusta, Georgia. And
Okay.
during that time, we ran one of the, I've run a lot of different rail incidents, but we ran a rail incident. We did all the hazmat and fire response for an incident that happened in Graniteville, South Carolina, right across the river from our area. And Red probably remembers this crash. It was there was a side rail that had a couple locomotives on the side of it inside this town. And early in the morning, somebody had not closed that side rail, and a freight train coming through went off on the side rail and hit the park train.
Oh my Lord.
The ending results was that they ruptured tanks of chlorine, and we had to shelter in place. We couldn't get in at that point. We killed 9, hospitalized close to 300 or 400. I can't remember the exact number now because it's been a while. But we were in the dark for a lot of that period of time. Without applications that are approved by FirstNet, without the use of FirstNet, we had to deal with this. Fortunately, they had reverse 911, so we could call the residents and shelter them in place. But we had no idea if we were going to have 9 dead or we were going to have 900 dead through most of that process, because we just didn't have good contact with everybody. So with an application like this, Red's very correct. It was in the old day was pull out your manual and get your binoculars and try and figure out the best you can. Or as some of the initial responders jumped in the back of a pickup and went riding down in there to see what was going on. Well,
And put your
unfortunately,
finger in it and
yeah,
taste it. Wasn't that a video that
the
we used
center
to
of
have
town
in
was a little
training?
lower than the rest of it, which is, you know, a lot of people heard this thing happen.
Yeah.
It happened right next to a textile plant, and some of them crawled on the roof to see what happened, and some of them went out the door. The ones that went out the door are the dead ones. The ones that crawled on the roof weren't, because it settled lower. So some of our injuries were first responders that went in there where they shouldn't have been. So it was a major incident, and any tool that you can get to make things work better and smoother and safer, I'm all for it. And this was a good example of that.
So we also had Dr. Rubenstein with us with the Image Insights Inc. And their technology was also really interesting, because when you talk about things like radiological hazards or radiological releases, there again, we're completely in the dark, right? I mean, there's no way to even see, and the damage is being done a lot of times before we even know what we're being subject to. So I'll ask you both again, as first responders, how valuable would it be to have a tool on your smartphone that can actually detect the ionization of radiological elements for you, and then notify you? Would that be beneficial at all?
Well, apparently I'm Mr. Disaster, because I have worked in 3 different areas around the country: the Northwest, the Southeast, and in Las Vegas. And each of those areas had significant nuclear facilities and some problems while I was there. So I've responded on earthquakes and tornadoes and volcanoes and you name it. So we had the Trojan incident, the Trojan stuff, where I worked in Washington State. Would have been able to use that then instead of carrying around another device trying to measure radiation before we even knew it was there. In Augusta, most of the chemicals that are manufactured or travel through the states are done right there in Augusta. And they've got the nuclear plant right next to where we had the rail incident. They actually sent their hazmat team in to help us as we responded to that. And in Nevada, you might guess that we have some here with the test site standing by, and the Department of Energy is right here. So we have lots of potential.
So yeah, and suffice it to say, here's the other interesting thing, right, about a lot of this stuff, and I find this to be true with the rail line as well. Unless you're studying up on this and you know your jurisdiction inside and out, not only does the general public not typically know what's in their backyard, but sometimes stuff's rolling through your jurisdiction. You can't possibly know what's on every rail car, and a lot of times people are doing things without hazardous materials permits, so you don't know what's kind of going on in your jurisdiction.
Yeah,
So,
if it's
Red,
the government sending it, the government is not mandated to placard it. In fact, they don't, because they don't want people to know what they're sending it around. So they notify the governor, but that's it.
Right, and then that's a really good point about the ask rail as well. I just want everybody to know that might be listening that ask rail, you have to be able to prove that you are a first responder. Clearly, for security reasons, we don't want everybody to know what's rolling over our rails. So, Red, I'm going to ask you really quickly, looking at both of these applications, I think one of the key things, other than clearly saving a life immediately, talk it from a first responder's perspective of what that additional time means to you.
Time is everything. You know, somebody once said that in terms of saving time, if you, geez, I'm going to butcher this, but it was something like, you know, if you don't think a minute counts, talk to the Olympic silver medalist. If you don't think a second counts, talk to, you know, it really kind of gives these reference points of saying, you know, if you don't think an hour counts, talk to this person. You don't think a minute counts.
Yep.
And I think that's, you know, it's easy to not understand, even from a responder perspective, what seconds might mean. I know, you know, we had plenty of conversations with our 911 center about how to get us dispatched quicker. We had plenty of conversations about how to get to the scene faster. We had plenty of conversations about where should we build our next fire station to make sure we're covering our district. And, you know, for each individual call, it might be kind of difficult to understand what that impact might be. But when you start looking at it as a whole, and if you start looking at it in a specific, if you start looking about, you know, the CPR in progress and start understanding that, you know, if we had gotten there and being able to get more advanced interventions 10 seconds quicker, you know, would their body physiology have reacted better and that person still be with us? So I think that, you know, just seeing how innovative these app developers are in this case, and taking advantage of hardware that's already there, taking advantage of the camera to be able to give actionable information to the responders. And to Chief's point, the more actionable information that you have, then the more effective your response is going to be.
Yeah, and talk about that response quickly, because you know, part of our challenge when we first originally arrive on scene is, you know, what am I going to need for resources, right? So how does that change the model for the resources that you're even calling for?
I think it just makes you more well informed. I know that you know, we sort of have this adage of it's always easier to cancel en route if you're not needed, but go ahead and get those resources on the way. And I'm a big believer in that. But if you can really determine what the exact need is and tailor a much more efficient response, then you start seeing a drop in those secondary calls for districts. You're able to be more efficient with your tax dollars, with your budget, with your staffing, to really serve the public better. So I mean, again, it really just kind of all ties together that the more information you're able to get, then the more informed decisions that you're able to make.
Well, and FirstNet gives us that opportunity to be able to live stream data. Now think about this. You were talking about rail incidents, rail traffic, whatever, school, you name it. What do they have around those things that are useful to us? Cameras. Those cameras with the ability for FirstNet for us to live stream that from a scene to see what is going on, to tailor the response, step it up, step it down, is invaluable. And sooner than somebody getting on scene. So if we could tie into those cameras, which we can now, we have the ability to live stream that to dispatch, to live stream that to the command cars en route. Those are tools that were Buck Rogers for us when we were responding back in the day. You and I were doing this, Martha.
Wait a minute, what?
Well, I don't want to give away your age, but
oh, you're hilarious. Well, and I was going to say, I mean, I've seen demonstrations for some of those cameras, whether they're mounted on buildings or mounted on drones. It is mind-boggling how clear those images are, and how succinctly you can get a handle on what is actually going on that scene without, stepping in it, right? Without just getting right in the middle of it.
If we'd had live streaming drones on that rail incident I was talking about, where we could do 360 of what's going on, send it right to where the rail cars are at, because they can be there when we can't.
Right.
It's just amazing how much difference that would have made.
So I know you guys are both fire guys, but I want to talk about the last application that we had on there, and it was a piece of equipment that covers a piece of body armor for law enforcement, and made by Select Engineering Services. And what it does is it detects when this material has been fully pierced. And actually, we can talk about this from an EMT paramedic standpoint as well, right? So let's presume that a law enforcement officer has been subject to some kind of attack, and their body armor has been pierced, which of course is going to require a significant force. But at the same time, but that officer may be completely incapacitated, or he or she is still fighting for their life. Sometimes they're not able. It was funny because he brought up LL Cool J on that webinar, saying, he's always so calm and cool in the middle of the battle, right? I need these resources to this address. It's like, no way, that doesn't happen that way. If you got the presence of mind to hit your panic button on your radio, you are light years ahead, right? But the truth of the matter is, you're probably still defending yourself and potentially rendered unconscious. So from an emergency response, what does that mean to those paramedics and those EMTs, knowing that one of their fellow officers is down with an immediate notification? Again, let's talk about time.
Well, Martha, this was actually my favorite app of the three, just because it's so timely nowadays. It did two things that were, I think, extremely important. One is it opened up the officer's phone, or could open up the officer's phone without them doing it themselves, so you could actually hear what was going on. I don't know if it opens up their camera or not, but it might. I don't know the answer to that. But I know we'd seen some testing of that in some of the hackathons we've seen. But the ability of them to communicate when something, even if they can't, and think about this. You talked about the EMT or medic responding. How many of our first responders on the fire side and EMS side are wearing vests nowadays? And I will tell you, I have heard testimony from a number of them who have been slashed with knives, shot on scene. If they had been able to get extra help right away just because of those things, it's invaluable to them. Same reason. Everything happens quicker to help people in need.
Yeah, exactly.
Martha, I want to make a comment that I think one of the things that really excites me about that app and about the technology is, call it the lack of user intervention. Several years ago, my department experimented with the man down feature of our radios. And, great concept that if the radio is laying sideways for too long, then the emergency button automatically kicks off. what we found was that we sort of lacked the discipline to implement it, because as soon as we are at the station and we set the radio down at the kitchen table and it falls over, everybody ignores it until dispatch starts calling us. Even at the scene of a fire, you're in rehab and drinking water. You don't realize that you put your gear down and it's laying sideways. So
Yep.
that type of technology, that man down button alarm, was really it was meant to be automated, but it takes such user training and presence of mind to understand, hey, this thing might trigger. This is a shirt, and as long as people know how to put a shirt on, that's kind of it. Now it does the figuring out and the alarming, and so I think that that level of technology is just so easy to adopt, and yet could really mean the difference between life and death for some people.
And it's really lightweight. I know the police officers are burdened down with all the stuff they have to wear nowadays, kind of like we do in the fire scenes, but we can at least take it off once in a while. They have to
Yep.
wear it all the time, but it was see-through. It was a very fine mesh, very light material. So I think it would not add to their burden.
Yep, exactly. Well, hey, gents, we're getting a little close to the end here. I do want to talk about the Apple untethering the first responder with FirstNet with FirstNet and Apple as well. So, Red, you were on that. Let's talk a little bit about the hardware and the integration and your perspective, being involved with the emerging technologies. What was your takeaway from that particular webinar?
My takeaway is that it's always important to really try and keep track of all the advancements going on. I was really excited to hear about some of their integration within their operating system. So they talked a little bit about how using a mobile device manager, that they do have the platform to kind of seamlessly integrate an MDM with the operating system, which makes it a lot easier for agencies to kind of automatically push out different applications that are needed that they're using. I think the other big thing that I just want to highlight that really my mind is still reeling by the concepts, is the addition of LiDAR to their hardware in the latest iPad and stuff. And so, he even sort of mentioned that, yeah, being able to take that LiDAR device, now part of a consumer product, but made for public safety, and the future ability of thinking about entering a room you've never been in and having this device take that snapshot to give you a 3D image of that room. I mean, we were still doing sort of manual pre-fire plans, and I got to tell you, my box drawing, circle drawing, my mapping skills might as well have been in crayon. So to think about having an Apple device with LiDAR in it is really going to, I think, just revolutionize so many different aspects, even for real time searches of buildings, but also that pre-planning ability to do it. And I think one of the other things that I really appreciate about Apple having a focus on public safety is that Apple has a market share with consumers. That if I'm an off-duty firefighter, if in my personal civilian life I'm using Apple products, I'm familiar with that operating system. I know where to click. I know where to do stuff. So if I can bring that familiarity to my agency and to the device that the agency is assigning me, then I think that there's a lot lower learning curve and just a much more seamless usage of that technology for public safety.
I loved the LiDAR for sure. I thought that was amazing. But another one that I really liked was the camera, the infrared camera, right? Where he was showing where his handprint was on the wall. There's an attachment that you can actually put on, Al. I think you were engaged in something else and not able to be at the Apple webinar, but there's an attachment where you can actually put like the FLIR camera on the phone itself. Now, granted, there's going to be intrinsically safe, blah, 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 making sure that it can get into these untenable atmospheres as far as heat. But talk a little bit about what do you pay for one of those infrared cameras in fire
Well,
department,
I
right?
remember when they first started coming out, and they were like $25,000 each in those days. Now
Yeah.
you can probably get them for 1,000 or 2,000. I don't know. I've been out of the business since 2012, but as we get more micro technology available to us, the less we have to carry around and wear, the less likely it's going to fall in the river when you have it on your helmet and you bend over to look where it's at and lose the $25,000 demo camera. I can tell you that happened.
I was going to say, that sounds like the voice of experience.
Yeah, give it to a captain. Captain leaned over the edge of the river and looked in,
Oh.
and away the helmet went.
Oh, dear Lord. Well, you know, I think what's been exciting about this week in particular for the PSBTA was, you know, we really captured a lot of really interesting material this week. And I just want to encourage, we're going to wrap up. Did either of you have any closing comments before we close?
Oh, thanks for doing this.
No, thank you.
Okay, yeah, not a problem. So in closing, I just want to encourage any of the viewers to visit the psbta.org. There is a page in there that has all of our upcoming webinars. In addition to every single webinar we've done this year is archived, and you're welcome to go in there and register and watch those anytime you want. This information that we're aggregating is really invaluable, especially the Lean In series that we're doing with FirstNet built with AT&T, because one of the challenges I think most agencies have is as the evolving technology comes out, it's hard to stay on top of it all, and it's hard to decide and you know, view and exercise all of these things to determine if it's going to solve your problem. So what we're trying to do with the Lean In series is really bring the application catalog to life. And I think Al, you might have mentioned the FirstNet approved apps or RED. Just so everybody knows, there is also a very rigorous process for any of these applications to get approved through FirstNet authority and then placed into the FirstNet application catalog. So not only are you reassured that it's going to be a useful application for you, but it's also going to be a reliable, reliable and secure application for you as well. So thank you for checking us out today. Please go to
am I wrong? Doesn't somebody that sign up for one of these webinars and attend, don't they get free membership into the association also?
Of course. Thank you, Al. You know, sometimes these things escape me, but thank you. So yes, we are in the throes of we want to help you out COVID promotion. So we would want not only to get you the information about the apps, but we also want to give you a free membership to the PSBTA Association. So it's a $75 value. You just register and attend, and we will send you a registration code so that when you sign up to be a member to the organization that it'll be free, and hopefully you'll engage with us and help us best represent you, because the PSBTA is truly here to advocate for first responders in this broadband space. So please check us out, and we'll see you next week. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Take care.